when you started babylonbee, I doubt that you thought that people like Elon Musk were going to be giant fans of babylonbee, and yet Elon Musk was, for a brief moment in time, it appeared that he was going to be the savior of Twitter. He was going to come in, he was going to flip a switch. Suddenly, all of the shadow banning of accounts was going to stop. Accounts like yours were going to come back online. He pretty much openly said that one of the reasons that he was getting involved is to stop the kind of censorship, like the censorship of the babylonbee on Twitter. So what do you know about how Elon Musk became a fan of your site? Because it's pretty wild.
I mean, he started engaging with our content out of nowhere. You know, every now and then we'd have an article, like someone would like screen grab it and send it to us. They'd be like, Elon Musk just commented on one of your articles. You know, he started commenting on them. He shared them a couple of times, and then he started following us. So, and then I think the Onion started picking at him and making jokes about him. And so to troll the Onion, he was like giving a nod to the babylonbee and commenting under their articles and saying, "Have you checked out the babylonbee? They're great. They're even better." You know. So he was kind of using us to troll the Onion for a little while. But he's been a fan of the Bee for a little while now, and he actually sat down with us for an interview on our podcast,
which is unique. He never sits down with anybody on the right side of the aisle.
It's hard to get him to do that. Yeah. But yeah, he was like, "Yeah, if you come to Austin, you know, I'll do a sit down with you." So we talked with him for a couple of hours, and that was a wide ranging discussion, by the way. But it was fascinating because we talked some about speech. We talked about wokeness. You know, he described wokeness as being divisive and exclusionary and hateful, and how it's like an excuse for people to be mean and cruel while armored in false virtue, which I thought was a great way of putting it. He turned to us and he asked us, he's like, "Well, what do you guys think about it?" And I'm like, "Can't beat that." That was a pretty good way of putting it. He cares a lot about the mind virus of wokeness, like he was just describing, and the ability of others to push back on it and debate this stuff. Like, you should be able to have these debates. We shouldn't have one side that just wins by default because everybody on the other side has been silenced, suppressed, throttled, suspended. So yeah, he refers to himself as a free speech absolutist, and he thought it was pretty outrageous when the Bee was locked out of our account. So, you know, we were hoping for a little while there that something was going to happen. Maybe it still will. I don't know. If he's going to be forced to go through with the deal, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to see him having to be spending $45 billion on a company that's market cap is not even remotely close to that. I mean, man, the multiples, I could go all down this. The multiples for that company right now are 160 times P. Their PE ratio is 160, which is just, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The bat bleep loony. But in any case, the other person.
He said it wasn't about money, though. That's the thing.
Right.
For him, it was not a financial deal where he's like, "I think Twitter's a great investment." I don't think he was thinking of it in those terms. He's thinking of it in terms of, there's a problem here. No one's dealing with it. Congress isn't dealing with it. Courts aren't dealing with it. The public square, if it exists today, is digital, right? Like, it's the modern, he calls it the town square, the digital town square. That's what he thinks of Twitter as being, Facebook as being. Like, these big tech platforms are, in fact, the town square of the modern age. So if free speech doesn't exist there, then it doesn't exist anymore. So what do we do about that? And he's just thinking in terms of, well, I have the resources to do something about it, so maybe I should step in and do something about it. I applaud him for that.
No, for sure. I mean, it's been fascinating to watch as he turned from a person who was the great hope for humanity into a cartoon villain almost overnight. And it had to do with the fact that he decided to fight back against wokeness, and that he basically suggested that merit ought to be rewarded and that we shouldn't decide based on equity concerns, kind of left-wing equity concerns, how to construct companies or how to do science.
Yeah.
It's been amazing to watch the morphing of him in the public view, according to the media. Again, like 3 years ago, Elon Musk was the guy who was going to take us to Mars, and he was going to make all of our cars electric, and
right.
He's going to
fighting climate change.
Exactly. He's going to create a tunnel in the San Fernando Valley to the city, like the whole thing.
Right.
And now, of course, all he's known for is being an evil Twitter troll who, you know, goes on yachts and talks with Seth Dillon. It's pretty amazing to watch that flip.
Yeah, he's now considered a far-right extremist just because he's not far-left.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is just, you know, Joe Rogan's in the same boat.
Yeah, I was about to ask about Joe. Yeah. So obviously I'm pretty friendly with Joe. I've been friends with Joe for a while. So you were just on his show pretty recently, and it really blew up. You know, there are a few issues that you guys got into that were really fascinating. So first of all, it is fascinating to see the dynamic that the left has about Joe, because Joe is clearly not a right-winger. I mean, I keep saying this over and over and over. Joe and I agree on maybe 35% of things politically. Like we both are very much in favor of free speech. Both of us dislike wokeness, but that's
he likes guns.
Yeah, exactly. He likes guns. He works out. Like these, and there the similarities kind of end, because when you get to, you know, kind of social values, or when you get to fiscal values, I mean, he endorsed Bernie Sanders. When you get to that sort of stuff, there's just wide divergence. But because Joe is not hard left, he's now been characterized as kind of one of us. That's the way that the political narrative works these days.
Yeah. He doesn't like that, by the way.
Uh,
But
or not.
I toasted him when I sat down. I said to my favorite far-right extremist,
Yeah.
he's like, I've never even voted Republican, like not
Yeah.
once. So yeah, it's unfair, those characterizations. And I think he cares about that maybe a little more than he should, because he wants to try to find ways when you're having discussions with me. He has to try to find ways to disagree with you. I did feel like maybe that was happening in our interview, maybe not, but that he was looking for an opportunity to disagree with me, because if he agrees with Seth Dillon on too many things, then obviously he's too right-wing, right? So he's got to have an issue to disagree with me on. And in our interview, the main thing that came up that we butted heads on, I think for the most part we agreed on a lot, because we were really focused on free speech and censorship. We were talking about what you and I were just talking about, the Twitter deal and deleting the tweet and Elon Musk. And he's going to come down on the side of, you should be able to make these jokes. You should be able to have free speech. But we got on the subject of abortion somehow. And I don't remember, I'd have to go back and watch. I don't remember exactly how it started, who brought it up, me or him. But that was where we kind of butted heads.
Yeah, and that was the sort of situation that went viral. And I thought it was a great example of how media coverage diverges, because everybody who's on our side of the aisle, everybody who's pro-life was like, this is a great exchange for Seth. Like, Seth did a really good job of explaining pro-life position. He didn't back down. He didn't get shy when he was asked about the edge issues, because the pro-choice side, they like to argue the edge issues as opposed to arguing the 99% of actual abortions, which are elective in nature. Instead, they like to argue rape or incest or life of the woman. They like to argue all those edge cases, and you really didn't back down on, for example, rape and incest. And so people on the right were like, this is great. And then the way that was portrayed in the left-wing media is, look at this extremist Seth Dillon and how Joe Rogan really woodshedded him.
Yeah.
And that really wasn't what the conversation was.
No, but he did. You're right, though. It's the edge. It's the emotional argument. He tried to bring in the most emotional case he could think of. And he has a daughter who's a teenager, and brought his daughter up as an example of, if my daughter were to get raped and get pregnant, do you have the right? You think you have the right to tell her that she's got to keep that baby? And I think it's very disingenuous if people on the left are going to use those examples as their argument for why abortion should just be available on demand. Because what percentage of pregnancies happen in those circumstances where you have a 14-year-old who's been raped? It's a very, very small percentage of pregnancy. So even if you have somebody, let's say, for example, I had conceded the point and said, okay, Joe, she should be allowed in that case to get an abortion. Then we have to now let's have a conversation about all the other abortions. Now what about those?
Right.
It's not rape. It was consensual sex. They didn't use any kind of contraceptive. And so you have a baby and you're not ready to have a baby. Is that okay? If it's not okay, then what is your argument going to be in those cases? And of course, they usually end up going off into something about, some kind of like self-defense argument, that it's like, it's going to be a financial burden,
Right.
Or I have bodily autonomy and I don't choose to give up my bodily autonomy. It's a threat to my bodily autonomy. So it's always like this, I have to defend myself against this thing that's coming into my area and is going to mess up my whole life. And so then you're on much shakier ground when you're trying to make that case, because do you really have the right to use lethal force against a threat of that nature? It's not a threat of imminent death or great bodily harm it's just a baby, a baby, not a bomb.
Who happens to be yours, by the way.
Who happens to be yours, genetically yours, So they're on much shakier ground there. That's why they prefer those edge issues. They have such emotional weight to them. So I think it's important that when we engage in those conversations, that we not give an inch and we say, it is an emotional argument, but you can make a very dispassionate, non-emotional response. Like I did. I just laid out a syllogism for him and just told him, if it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life, then it's wrong all the time.